Make your way around the outside of any of these tables, and please remain standing. Come in. Welcome. Hey, God bless you, Gabe. Good to see you, man. We have plenty of room here. We got a good table right back here, and this one has the light. You can see your food here. All right. Fantastic. Let's see. We need you guys to sit kind of all the way down here towards the end, if you would, please. And let's see. We need 3 people right here. So just kind of squish in right in this area. This is good. And you guys are great. You guys are great. Oh, man, this is wonderful. Come on in, everybody. Plenty of more seats over here at this table, some back here at this table, and we have a couple of extras over here, too. And if you want to sit on the floor, we can always fit you in on the floor. Fantastic. Well, while you're coming in, and please remain standing, my name is Jay McCarl. I think Pastor Ken may have told you that I'm the pastor of Calvary Georgetown Divide, which is between Auburn and Placerville in that blank spot on the map that you see once in a while. We actually have a church up there. But I am, God bless you someday, I am privileged to be able to do this wherever the Lord wants me to do it, just because that church up there allows me to, and I am so grateful for their cooperation, their help, their prayers to be able to do this. Tonight is a biblical dinner, and I need to tell you what it isn't before I tell you what it is. It is not. Now, wait a minute. Let me do that again. It is not. Wait, one more time. Tonight is a Passover Seder. Have you got that? So if you go out of here saying, did you go to the Seder last night? Your answer is, no, I didn't go to a Seder because it wasn't a Seder. Tonight is not a Passover Seder. I love Passover Seders. If you've ever been to one, you know how valuable it is just to understand biblical prophecy from the times of Moses, because God gave Moses the Passover, and man, you can see Jesus written all over it. It's amazing. That's not tonight. There are some elements of a Passover on your table, but also elements of lots of other feasts, and you'll get a chance to chow down on this in about a half an hour. I'm going to turn you loose on it, but I need to let you know what our purpose is here tonight. It's not to get a lot of facts. You get facts anywhere. You can go read a book and stay home. It's for us to be able to crawl inside the heads, inside the minds of the people who walked with Jesus and lived during his time. And that is much different than anything you've ever done unless you are specifically from the tribal areas of the Middle East today, because they still kind of think that way. But we don't. We definitely don't. And I want you to go there tonight, because the next time you open up your Bible, as one woman said when she attended a biblical dinner, she said, next time I open my Bible, it became a pop-up book. And hopefully it'll become that way for you too tonight. Let me ask you this, because I got a lot of friends here, lots of familiar faces, but how many of you have not been to one of these that I'm doing tonight before? Put your hands up. Go ahead. Oh, good. This is marvelous. You guys are going to have the time of your life tonight. Well, look, let me take you back a couple of thousand years to an ancient feast. And I'm a rich man, you see. You can tell by the way I'm dressed. And I've been listening to this young rabbi who's a very interesting person. He changed my life, and he's been telling me these things like, don't just invite the rich to your feasts because they can pay you back. Invite the poor to your feasts because they can't pay you back. And I thought, what a marvelous thing. I happen to know some poor people. You. So I send my servant over to your village to get you. Very early in the morning, he gets there late in the or in the middle of the afternoon and pounds on your door and says, I have a gospel for you. I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but you know what the gospel is, don't you? I don't think you do. You see, the gospel is now the message of Jesus Christ and the good news of salvation, isn't it? But in those days, the word gospel existed before the message of salvation was ever attached to it. A gospel message was when you got a message that was only good news, no bad news attached to it. As a law enforcement chaplain, I have pounded on many people's doors in the middle of the night, and it was never good news. And you probably had that happen too, maybe one too many times. But when somebody pounds on your door and says, I've got a gospel for you, it's a message that's only good news, there's no bad news in it, and the message is, you're coming to my master's feast. Isn't that the gospel message? Yeah. So you go with my servant. He takes you across hill and dale, and you finally get to my house. And as you get to my house, my servants rush out. They pour water on your feet, pots of water. They pour pots of water on your hands. You splash it on your face. They give you a towel. You wipe it off. You're refreshed. And now that you've been refreshed, my servants have done their job. They part, and I walk right up the middle to meet you, and I greet you in the typical manner of that day. I say to you, hi. No, have you ever thought about our greetings? Hi. What does that mean? It's polite. Hello. What does that mean? I have no idea. How's it going? That makes a liar out of both of us, doesn't it? Because you don't want to know, and I don't want to tell you, but it's polite to ask, isn't it? No, what do they say? Somebody said it. They say what? No, they don't. They say Shalom Aleichem. Repeat after me. Shalom Aleichem. No. Repeat after me. Shalom Aleichem. All right, still there's too much California accent in that. It's Shalom Aleichem. You got to get the in there. Very, very good diction, okay? Okay. By the way, this is sort of old King James Hebrew. It's something, they don't say it like this anymore. But this is what they would have said in the old days. Shalom Aleichem. Very good. Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem. Now, if somebody comes up to you and says Shalom Aleichem, there is a response. Your response is Alechem HaShalom. Alechem HaShalom. Alechem HaShalom. So I say to you, Shalom Aleichem, and you respond? Would you please, wait, before you do, I do have to say something. What is all of this? Shalom Aleichem means peace be unto you. That's what it means. And when you say Alechem HaShalom, it means, and unto you peace. Now, realize this isn't a, hi, how are you, howdy, how's it going? This is a blessing, because I am saying, may God bless you by saying Shalom Aleichem, or peace be unto you. It's may God bless you with his peace. That's all I'm saying. It's a prayer. Doesn't sound like a prayer. It is, because it's something only God can do. The type of peace we're talking about, the peace of good health, a long life, the peace of blessings from God, the peace of prosperity. We're not talking about a prosperity doctrine thing here. We're talking about, I would that God would make you prosperous. That would be a wonderful thing for you. So when I say Shalom Aleichem, I'm saying all of those things. Peace be unto you. It's a prayer. And when you respond to Lechem HaShalom, it's a prayer back. And when you do that, let me tell you something about God. He does lots of things, more than you know. But he also loves to bless. And this is not an act, folks. When you say Shalom Aleichem to someone and they respond back, you better get ready for God to bless you, because I am convinced he will. Would you please say Shalom Aleichem, Alechem HaShalom? Greet one another in the traditional way. Go ahead and do that right now. Shalom Aleichem, brother. How are you? Alechem HaShalom. Marvelous. We are going to be blessed. You are going to be blessed, because it's something only God can do, and we have asked him to do it. Now, before you sit down, there would be something else that happens out in front of my door. I'm just going to tell you about it tonight, but there would be a gesture. I would touch my heart, my lips, my forehead, my palms open, and you see people in the movies doing that. It's actually correct. It goes like this, and it means that, oh, with my heart I love you. With my lips I honor you. With my thoughts I esteem you as greater than myself. With my palms open, there's nothing there to hurt you. And with my bow I humble myself before you, all while saying Shalom Aleichem. What a great greeting that is. And it also tells you that we're going to sit and talk for a day or two. This feast is going to go on for a while. And then I would give you a holy kiss. No, I'm not going to make you do that tonight. And then I would invite you into my house. And as you began to step into my house, you would knock your shoes off right at the threshold of my house. You don't have to take your shoes off tonight unless you want to. and then you would step barefoot into my house. There would be this marvelous feast set for you, and I would bid you sit down, and you would. Would you please have a seat? We can always make room for more. If you don't have a seat, we'll find them for you. So, how you doing there, Gabe? All right. I want to introduce you guys to a friend of mine, by the way. There's so many friends here, but you probably don't know this young man with the suspenders, and his name is Gabe Stein. And Gabe, how many of these have you been to? 15, 20, something like that? Well, whatever it is, Gabe's going to start doing them someday. I'm convinced of it. So God bless you, Gabe, and it's good to see you again. Gabe is a Messianic, by the way. He loves Jesus, and he is Jewish, and just a great brother in the Lord. So meet him when you get the chance, and his friends, too, who I don't really know, but there they are. Well, hey, listen, you're in my house now. You have gotten out to my table, and I now, before you can eat, have to bestow on you 4 gifts of hospitality. The gifts of hospitality, not in this order. One of them is I'm going to give you a cold cup of water. To give you a cold cup of water is like giving you a hug, saying, I'm so glad you're here, because water is precious. And besides, I can make it cold by putting it into a soaked clay pitcher and put water into it, and on a very hot day, set the pitcher outside, and the water evaporates off the surface of the pitcher, and the water temperature in the pitcher drops. So on a 110-degree day, I can give you a cup of water that's about 70 degrees. So I give you a cup of cold water. You've read about verses in the Bible where Jesus says, if anyone gives one of these little ones, his disciples, a cup of cold water because he's one of mine, they will be blessed. Yeah, that's where that comes from. I give you a cup of cold water. I would anoint your head with oil, which would make you smell good. It would match your hair down with oil. But when you leave, people are saying, man, somebody loves that guy, because it was really a fantastic tradition in those days. We would think it's kind of icky and gooey, but boy, they loved it. Another one, as I would burn a pinch of incense to make the room smell really good, because you have to remember, houses in those days aren't like our houses. They smelled really bad. The smaller the house, the worse they smelled, but even a big house might have a rudimentary toilet in it, and therefore it doesn't vent well. You can imagine how it smelled. I have bigger flocks and herds. If we're downwind, we're in trouble. I'm burning incense for you to honor you by making my house smell good. But the first gift of hospitality that I would give you, and I'm saving it to last, is as you came in, I would make sure that your feet got washed. I want your feet washed, not because they smell bad, though they do, but because it will really bless you. And it's really the greatest blessing. Now, you say, well, I've already had water poured on my feet. I know. But this is a special ceremony that goes for my guest of honor. And there's some things about it that you're going to need to hang on to for later. You see, when I bring in my foot-washing servant or slave, you're going to realize a few things right away. You'll recognize it because you're part of this culture. You grew up in this culture. You see, in those days, in every household that had servants, whether it was a Hebrew household or slaves, a Roman household, or even a pagan household, there were always ranks of slaves in that household. The Bible even refers to this. Ranks of slaves. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, a slave is a slave is a slave. And the servants the Hebrews had were kind of like slaves, except they were guaranteed to be set free after a while, unless they willfully didn't want to do it. But a slave that was the highest ranking slave in a household might be like the chief steward of a household. If you ever saw the movie Ben-Hur, the original one, there was a character in there named Simonides, who was Ben-Hur's right-hand man. Well, he was a slave, but he was also the chief steward of the household. He took care of the household, and he was highly respected. That's just a movie and a story. What about the Bible? Joseph, the son of Jacob. Remember, he gets sold into slavery to Potiphar's house. In 2 years, what's he doing? He's running a house, and everybody likes him. Everybody respects him. He's a slave. He owns nothing. He is owned, but they like him. He's a very respectable man. And then you might own A doctor. That's your medical system in those days. Some people think Luke might have been a freed slave, a doctor. And then you might have educators, and you would have body servants and washerwomen and cooks. And all the way down, the lowest ranking slave anywhere was your foot washer. Because the foot washing slave had the filthiest, dirtiest, nastiest job in the world. And they were considered, when you saw a foot washer, you would say, there is no lower person on earth when you saw that foot washer. That was the worst job in the world. Why? Because the bottom of your foot in that culture is considered the filthiest part of the human body. Now you might think, I can think of worse places than that. No, you don't have to, all right? It's bad enough. The bottom of your feet, worst part of the human body. I will tell you this, because most of you in this room are Westerners. Maybe some of you came from India or the Far East or someplace. But here's the thing. The bottom of your foot in half the world is still considered the filthiest part of the human body. And in half the world today, if anybody washes your feet, they're considered very, very low. In Bible times, they were the worst. The lowest, the least, the last, as Gail Irwin would put it. You guys all know him, right? That's what he would say. And that would be the foot washer. And the reason why is they know where your feet have been. Your feet have been, well, in between villages. You've been walking where, shall I put it gently, where the animals have been? Okay? When you're in the village, well, what do you do with your bedpans at night? Right out the window. You've been walking where people have been. I know that's disgusting, but it's true. They know how bad your feet are. Plus, you're either barefoot or in open-toed sandals. The person who has to wash that stuff off, man, they've got to be low because they actually have to handle that part, that filthiest part of your human body. But there's more. You see, if you really wanted to insult somebody in those days in just a gigantic way, there were lots of ways to do it. But the one way that seemed to be the worst of all was when you exposed the bottom of your foot to somebody on purpose. You never do that because it's like spitting in their face and saying, I wish you were dead. You may remember, see, this is still today. You may remember just a little over 8 years ago, President George Bush is about to leave office. He goes to Iraq. He has a news conference. Some of you are going, I remember this. Yeah. And at the back of the room, an Iraqi reporter pulls off his penny loafers and hurls them across the room at the president. Well, the Americans watched that on the news, and they went, ha, 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 look at that. The people in the Middle East went, oh, because that was like saying, I wish you were dead. That's what it means. And it also opens our eyes a little bit to a few little things in the Bible, which you can read on your own because you will discover them on your own. But let me just point one out to you in John 13, where Jesus, referring to Judas but having not identified him yet, says, the one who has eaten my bread has lifted up his heel against me, which tells you that Judas's betrayal was not an accident, that Judas's betrayal was a true betrayal. It wasn't some poor, sad patriot doing his duty mistakenly. It was something where he was saying, because Jesus used that expression, Judas was saying, I wish you were dead. And that's a very interesting thing. Well, we'll take that a little further later. But that's your foot washer. And they're going to come over, and they're going to come into the room, and they're going to wash your feet because you're my guest of honor. And there's only one guest of honor at a table, but you're all my guests of honor tonight. And boy, you're going to be so refreshed when they're done with all of these gifts of hospitality. And when they're done, it's time to eat. Now, first of all, I've got to give you some rules. I'm going to tell you what's on the table, and then we're going to pray, and we're going to pray the way they did. And at this time, I'm going to dismiss the servants, and they're going to go begin to ladle out an authentic Middle Eastern stew, which they're going to serve you in just a few minutes. So the servants, are you here? You're going to go there? Or maybe they're back there already. Anyway, that's their heads up, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so on your table is typical fare of ancient times. I will tell you this, too. On your table is fare that is 1,000 times better than anything they ever ate, because they will love the food that they had, but if you were to see it or taste it today, you'd be going, no way. This stuff is terrible. So today, our quality of food is so far above these people. On your table are things that you may have found at a Passover Seder, because the Last Supper indeed was part of a Passover, but also other types of feasts. And there is also a theory that's floating around today among very legitimate scholars, which is interesting. The Last Supper, which was a Seder, I'll talk about this in just a second, well, actually a few minutes after your break, but the Last Supper, which was a Seder, may have had a real meal afterwards later on in the evening, where they served food that was a whole lot more digestible than just the things that they gave for the time of Moses. Because the Passover evolved over time. If you're students of the Bible, like Jim is this real student of the Bible here, you go look that up and you realize there may be a possibility that there was a greater feast after the very ceremonial one at the Last Supper. But on your table, the one thing on your table that isn't authentic are the bell peppers. Bell peppers are going to come in real handy for you in just a little bit. Bell peppers are from the New World, but we put them there for a reason, and also, well, they add a little color to the table. Also on your table, you have pita bread. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. You have salt, which you take a pinch and salt your food. You have hard-boiled eggs in the middle of your table. You have hummus. You have bowls of honey in which you can dip your bread. You have nuts. You can dip the nuts in the honey. You've got dried fruit, including prunes, dates. The dates are pitted, but be careful. Sometimes they miss one, but I tested them tonight, and they're really good. But there's dates in there, there's prunes, there's dried apricots. The fruit in the middle of the table that you have here, the grapes and the apples and the pears, they're not garnishes. They've been washed, and they're ready to eat. You also have pickles, which they would have had pickles in Jesus' day. You have bowls of raisins. You have Mediterranean-style olives, which are, again, supposedly pitted. I tried some, but sometimes they miss one, so just be careful on your table there. Lots of good things, and you can just explore. Now, there's something missing on your table, though. What is it? Plates. What else is missing on your table? Forks, knife, fork, spoon. That's right. And the reason why is it wasn't for another 1,000 years after Jesus that somebody put a fork on a table for people to eat with, or a spoon in order to ladle for something like soup or what have you. It's a very, very new Advent silverware. But back in Jesus' day, it was a dipping meal. And all the things on your table, you might be saying, how do I eat all of this stuff? I mean, what's the procedure? There is no procedure. You eat it any way you want to because you are my guest. If you want to eat the tablecloth, you can eat the tablecloth. Okay, we're not going to be serving just yet, you guys. Hang on, and I'll tell you when. It's okay. These guys are the greatest in the kingdom of heaven over here because they are truly the servants of all. And I'm going to bring out here in just a few minutes, so just hang on. But here's the deal. On your table again, you've got stuff all over your table. I am your host, and you are greater than I. You can eat it in any order, in any way you want to. But we have to start with prayer. And here's how we pray. It always starts with bread. Now, as I'm telling you about the bread here in just a second, I want you to realize your first table manner. Everybody raise your right hand. Tonight, this is your knife, your fork, and your spoon. Everyone raise your left hand. You will not touch my food with this horrible hand. Everybody raise your right hand. This is the clean hand. This is the kosher hand. Everybody raise your left hand. This hand was used in the days of no toilet paper. Yeah. Oh, okay, listen. Once again, half the world abides by this tradition to this day. You think, well, where is that? You just need to travel a little bit and you discover it. Why do we shake right hands when we meet each other? It's not because it's the sword hand. It's because it would be very, very insulting to try and shake with the left hand because we know where that hand has been. Your hands have been washed. We had a ceremonial hand washing, which would have been part of our evening too. But still, we know where that left hand's been. So you're going to eat with your right hand, which brings up two questions. Some of you are immediately thinking, wait a minute, I'm left-handed. What about me? Congratulations. Tonight you get to find out what it's like to eat right-handed. You say, I don't want to. Then you don't have to. Have the person next to you feed you, but you're not touching my food with that horrible hand, or I will have it removed. You've defiled it. You think I'm kidding. That's what they did back in those days. If you accidentally touched food with your left hand, the host would discreetly have the food removed, not because you insulted him, but because you defiled the food. You're eating with your right hand. Now, how do you peel an egg with one hand? You don't have to. You're not going to eat the shell. Hold the shell in your left hand, peel it with your right hand, eat the contents. That's simple. Same thing with cups, plates, bowls. You can touch those with your left hand. How do you eat the stew? Put the bowl up to your mouth with the left hand and shovel it in with the bread with the right hand. That's what you do. So that's your rule. Now, here's the next rule. Bread. This is the most important item of food on your table tonight. Bread to the Jews was life itself. A Jewish scholar even once said that to the Jew, bread is life. It's the very essence of our being. I had the privilege of being able to be the director of the Calvary Chapel Bible College in Jerusalem for one semester back in 2 years ago. And while I was there, man, you spend all time just walking around the old city, and I noticed something very interesting. You never found bread in a trash can. And you knew that because it was never in the trash can. It was around the trash can, on ledges, on steps, everywhere but in the rubbish. Because to the Jew, bread is life. This is something that is very holy. To a lot of Arabs, they treat it the same way. It's life to them. And when the Jews pray, they do it with bread because it reminds them that it's God that provides the miracle of being able to even grow wheat or barley to make bread out of. But more than that, God provided for them miraculously when they wandered in the wilderness. He gave them what? He gave them what? He gave them what? No, I'm not asking a question. I'm making a statement. You know what manna means, don't you? Manna means what? It's Hebrew for what is it, or whatchamacallit. So manna means, I don't know what that is, but there it is. Okay, it's whatchamacallit. That's what manna is. What? So he gave them what? You got it. Yeah, don't answer. That's right. But that's what he gave them. And when they practice Passover and they do the ceremony for Passover, or when they eat any meal, it's to remind them that it's God who gives the bread. Even if it's from heaven miraculously, they are alive because God gave them miraculous bread so they could wander in the wilderness for 40 years and not perish completely as a people. So they reverence bread, and they reverence it in a big way. In fact, Jesus even took it upon himself to say this. Over in John chapter 6, he had just fed the 5,000 the day before. And they came back for breakfast the next day. And there in the synagogue at Capernaum, he disappointed them by not feeding them again. Instead, he said, you know why I did that the day before? I'm paraphrasing now. He said, because I am the bread of life. Your fathers, your ancestors, they ate manna in the wilderness, but they died. This is the bread that comes down from heaven that one may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread who comes down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. And the bread that I shall give, my flesh, which I shall give for the life of the world. I am the bread of life, Jesus said. That's how much they reverence bread. And if they reverence it that much, what am I doing wrong right now? I'm holding this holy thing with my left hand. I can't do that. Can I? Of course I can. You say, no, that's a contradiction. I'm not supposed to touch any other food with my left hand, but I can touch bread with my left hand? Exactly. As a matter of fact, any rabbi would tell you that when practicality gets in the way, traditions go away. Because in order to give thanks to God for the bread, you need to break it. You don't cut it with a knife. That's considered wickedness. Instead, you break the bread. To break the bread, you need two hands to do it. And I break it like that. It's okay to handle bread with your left hand. You say that's ridiculous. Yes, it is. But it's the facts. That's what they did. And they needed both hands to do it. And so do you. We're going to pray, and you're going to break bread in the presence of the Lord, and we're going to pray the way that they prayed back in the days of Jesus, and many cases in this world still pray the same way. They've been using this prayer for almost 4,000 years that I'm going to teach you to pray, and I will tell you that Jesus prayed this same prayer many, many times, probably thousands of times. It's not recorded in the Bible, because it's like singing Happy Birthday to You. Everybody knows the song. Why put it down on paper, right? So they didn't put it in the Bible, but it's the way they prayed. Would you all please take a piece of bread, handle it reverently, with respect, give it with both hands to the person next to you as if you're giving that which is life to them as you hand it to them. And please hold the bread in both hands. Everybody got your bread. Now, here's how they would pray. First of all, if I were to say right now, let's pray. You would bow your head, you would close your eyes, and maybe fold your hands, but you see, that's not what the Jews did. They did it differently. When they prayed with their eyes open, looking up towards heaven. And they would hold the bread up before the Lord that God provided for them. And they always prayed the same prayer every single time. You say, well, that's not right. Oh, yes, it is. Jesus did it, and he did it continually. If you mean it, it's important, and it's important to God. So you would pray the same prayer. He said, did they ever pray spontaneously? Yes. In fact, they did. At the end of every great feast, the host of the feast would lift up his voice and pray whatever was on his heart, and we have one of those recorded for us in the Bible, just one. Happens to be over in John. It's all of chapter 17. Jesus is not in the Garden of Gethsemane. He is still in the upper room, and he lifts up his voice in prayer, and he prays for himself, for his disciples, and you got to go read it, John 17. He prays for you. You're in that chapter, and you got to see what he prayed for you, but I'll leave that up to you. So at the beginning of the meal, they would pray the same prayer every single time. They would hold the bread up before the Lord. They would keep their eyes open and look up to the Lord, and they would pray this prayer. Repeat after me one phrase at a time. Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who gives us bread from the earth. That's your prayer. But you see, you did it beautifully, but you did it in the wrong language. Let's pray the prayer in the language Jesus would have prayed it in. He probably spoke Aramaic as a regular language with his guys, but they always prayed and read in Hebrew. And this is in Hebrew. Hold your bread up before the Lord, and together we say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, melech haolam hametzeleka min haaretz. Amen. That's it. One phrase at a time with me. We hold our bread up before the Lord, eyes looking up towards heaven in gratitude to God, and we say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, melech haolam hametzeleka min haaretz. And your amen is to tear off a small bite-sized piece of bread, hold it in your right hand, do not eat it. You take the small bite-sized piece of bread, you reach around to your left, and you put it in the mouth of the person to your left, just like that. Everybody do that right now. Very good. Now, before I bring our servants in, I need to tell you what it is you just did. And I want to encourage you to do it some more for the rest of your life. Because when you put that bread into each other's mouth, you did exactly what everybody everywhere in the world, and I've done this thing on 6 continents, they have all done the same thing. They laughed and they giggled. Except when you do it in the Middle East, and they go, wow. Because when you take a piece of bread and you tear it off and you put it into somebody else's mouth, you are doing that person the greatest honor you could possibly do to another person except for physically dying for them. How does that work? It's a nonverbal message. You tear the bread off and you go up to a person and you want to honor them in the greatest way possible. You just take that bread and put it in their mouth, and by doing so you are saying, you are my brother or my sister, whatever the case, and I would gladly die for you. I love you. I honor you. I highly esteem you. I am your friend. And in some cases, it even means, and this is really handy, I forgive you. So if there's somebody here tonight and you feel that way about them, I encourage you during our break or after the proceedings that we have here tonight or tomorrow morning, Sunday morning, don't forget daylight savings time, don't be late for church, but even on Sunday morning or during communion, when you put bread into somebody else's mouth, that's the message you're sending them. You are my brother or sister, and I'd gladly die for you. I love you. I honor you. I highly esteem you. I'm your friend. And I forgive you if there's anything to be forgiven. Keep that in mind and use it. Use it, use it. Well, with that, There's one more table manner, and at this time we can ask the servants to begin to come in, and they're going to serve you an authentic Middle Eastern lamb stew. There are almonds in it. Be aware, okay? So just let you know that they're in there in case you have something to do with that. But the deal is that if you happen to notice your friend taking some food, bringing it up to their mouth, and they're about to eat it, and you really want it, you say, that looks really good, reach over and take it out of their hand and eat it. We esteem each other as better than ourselves, and that's one way you know that they are happy giving it to you. So you can do that. So with that, folks, as they serve you your meal here, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then the next portion of our evening goes a lot longer, so buckle your seatbelts, but it'll change your lives. And as we say in Israel, B'tei Avon, good eating to you, and I'll be back in 10 minutes. God bless you guys, and enjoy your meal. All right, if I could have your attention, please. Don't stop eating, but please give me your undivided attention for the rest of the evening, if you would. First of all, again, everything on your table is good. I mentioned it to a few of you because I forgot to mention it. I didn't finish my point, that the bell peppers make great spoons for your stew, and you can eat the silverware when you're done. So that's why it's there. That was the main purpose. I wanted to let you guys know something else, and Pastor Ken knows this. I didn't come here to hawk products. I want to let you know that we have some books back here, that my policy on the books are that they are $10 each or they are free. Ask me, I will hand you one, no questions asked. So the $10 is just a suggested donation, and it is truly a suggested donation, and it's self-service back there. And the reason I'm telling you that is because I was asked for years, do you have notes on this? Do you have it recorded? Do you have something on this? And finally, I wrote a book, and it's called Broken Bread, An Ancient Look at the First Last Supper. Everything and a lot more that I'm talking about tonight is in this book. So it's available back there. If you want a copy, I got lots and lots of copies. I just as soon not bring any home with me. So they're back there. This is tonight. This is the biblical dinner, and it's called Broken Bread. It's got your pita bread right there on the front. Then there's another book back there of something that I did here with Pastor Ken a few years ago for Valentine's, and it's called The Galilean Wedding. The Galilean Wedding is another presentation that I do that talks about how the Galileans related to some things that Jesus said that you wouldn't know he was talking about a wedding as a modern American, but you would know it if you were an ancient Galilean. And Jesus used the Galilean wedding to talk about the end of the world, his coming, his second coming. And he did it over and over again, and it's one of the most interesting and also one of the most profound things he ever taught, because it really shows you the depth of the love of God for you. And so I wrote a book on that one, and it's called The Best Day of Forever, Jesus, a Galilean Wedding, and the End of the World. And it's back there as well. And again, it's all about this Galilean wedding thing. It reads just like the biblical dinner. Both these books are pretty much written the way I talk, so they're very, very easy to get into. The third book that's back there is a little different, a lot different, actually. It's a college-level book. It was originally my master's thesis, and as a law enforcement chaplain, the origin of the book is what it says, Answering Evil, Crisis, Compassion, and Truth in an Age of Uncertainty. And this came out of trying to, as a law enforcement chaplain, answer for God when somebody comes to you and say, why did God just kill off half my family? Tell me what God was thinking. I can't tell you what he was thinking, but the answers for how he treats us and how much his love penetrates all that is in this book, and that's back there. But it's definitely a philosophical piece. This, junior hires could read it, and you will love it. I hope you'll get a copy of it. It's back there. And as I said, it's only a suggested donation, but I suggest 10 each. And if you don't have it, I just want you to go out with it. Let me hand it to you. I'll even sign it for you. I just want you to have the resources. So that's really, really important. On your table, you have these little oil lamps burning. They're not burning oil like in kerosene or something flammable. They're just burning olive oil. But these lamps are replicas, and in some cases, with the reddish ones that are very, very smooth, those are exact replicas of Herodian oil lamps. What does that mean? They're oil lamps from the time of King Herod. They're the exact size, they're the right shape, and they're functioning exactly as they would have functioned in Jesus' day, because he lived during the time of King Herod. The Herod dynasty was during that time. That's what these lamps are. The ones with the bumps, those are Byzantine, which means late Roman. Sometime after 335 AD, they would have produced lamps like that. But the smooth ones are the same type of lamps that Jesus spoke about when he talked about the parable of the 10 virgins who had oil lamps, 5 wise, 5 foolish, 5 had oil, 5 didn't. These are the lamps. These are the same type of oil lamps that would have lit the Last Supper table. These are the same type of oil lamps that Jesus said, you don't take a lamp and hide it under a bowl is what it literally means. And you look, they're in a bowl. The bowls are there to catch oil that drips because oil was so precious. It was something that the disciples would have laughed at. You don't take a lamp and put the bowl on top of it. Yeah, it's funny, right? It's amusing. That's exactly what it was intended to be, to teach the lesson that he wanted. You don't put the bowl on top of the lamp. You let the light shine. These are the same type of lamps. Now you know. Well, let's talk a little bit about the Last Supper. Now, the Last Supper was a Passover. There's a lot of debate on this lately, but the deal is that Jesus called the Last Supper on the day of the Last Supper 4 times. He called it a Passover. So, unless Jesus lied, the Last Supper was a Passover. But when you think of the Last Supper, well, it's pretty obvious what comes to mind. Right there. Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper. Painted on the dining hall wall. I love that part. This is painted on the dining hall wall of the Chapel of Santa Maria della Grazia in Milan, Italy. It's nearly life-size. Even in its decrepit condition, it's considered possibly the greatest work of art in the entire Western world. Leonardo da Vinci was every bit the genius that he is made out to be. Obviously, by his art, he was certainly a genius, but he was not a theologian. This thing is so wrong. He didn't know what he was doing when he was painting it. In other words, there's no code in there, guys. He didn't know what he was doing when he painted that thing. It's marvelous, but here's what's wrong with it. Somebody tell me, you guys know about the Passover. At what time of the day was the Passover supposed to take place? What time of day? Somebody tell me. When? Evening, right? Look behind Jesus' head. Nice, bright blue afternoon sky. Next problem with it. Jesus, the host of the feast, is right in the center of the table. The Jews never ate that way in Jesus' day. They never ate at long tables like that. They never sat on high stools like these guys were doing or in chairs because only kings and queens ate that way. That's not a Jewish style of eating in Jesus' day. If you look under the table, and you can see it maybe from here, it's a little dark, but especially on the right-hand side, you can see the disciples' feet. They're all wearing their sandals. Very bad manners, folks. And, of course, where are you going to get a white tablecloth like that? At the Jerusalem White Tablecloth store? It isn't going to happen. On the table, well, what's the most important ceremonial item of food at a Passover on the table? What would it be? You're eating it right now. What is it? Well, that too, but what's the other one? Lamb. That's right. Leonardo painted fish. No lamb. And on the table, of course, you were supposed to have unleavened bread. If you had unleavened bread on your table, it would look like a tortilla or like a paper napkin. If we had unleavened bread here tonight, it would taste like a paper napkin. That's why we have fully leavened bread. That's what the pita bread is on your table. Leonardo didn't like any of that, so he painted Italian dinner rolls all over the table. It's a beautiful painting. It's the masterpiece of the Western world, but it is not correct theologically. It's so incredibly wrong. Listen, the Jews, and please forgive me, my back's going to be to you guys for a little bit, so I hope you'll just watch my back sometimes. But listen, the Jews never ate the way that we eat. What they would do is, first of all, a woman would prepare the meal. The guys never did. They sat around, drank coffee, and talked about politics. Not much has changed, has it, ladies? Anyway, she would take a cook pot, maybe made out of clay. This one's bronze, so wealthy people might have one of these. But she would nestle it down into a little charcoal fire. She would put water in there and then throw in beans. Beans in the Middle East? Oh, yeah, all the time. Beans, lentils, vegetables, all kinds of things. She would make sort of a paste. It would be like, it's just sort of like oatmeal almost, like goo. But, you know, they had to eat that way because they couldn't afford to kill their animals. Their animals gave them milk, wool, labor, these sorts of things. They wouldn't go and kill them and eat them. That's not what they were for, unless you were really, really rich, and then you could afford that. But peasants, no way. And about 85% of the people in Israel during the days of Jesus, in the Galilee region alone, about 85% were so poor, they ate maybe every other day. Let me give you a detail that's given to us in the Gospels that I find fascinating. In all 4 Gospels, the feeding of the 5,000 is recorded. In one of the Gospels, an additional feeding of 4,000 people is recorded, and all the times it notes that it didn't include the wives and the children of the men. So we're talking well over 10,000 people each time. Jesus fed all these people. At the end of each time, he ended by saying, and they all ate and were full. Why that detail? The Bible doesn't waste words. Why that detail? Because it may be the only time in these people's lives they ever ate until they were full. They were that poor. So you have this little gruel that the woman would make for the guys. Maybe the girls would help out, the daughters, and then they would sit around in a position like what I'm sitting around a cook pot. Now, what's the filthiest part of the human body? What is it? Right, where are my feet? Out behind me. I can't insult my neighbors and my family members by sitting in a weird position where I'm even going to show my feet to them. I don't want to do that, so I'm going to sit on my feet. I'm going to tear off a piece of bread. I'm going to take it like again, the bread in those days, more like a tortilla, and you would take it and just grab it and reach in, and you would grab the food and you'd put it in your mouth. That's how you ate a meal in Jesus' day. Not like that. However, once a year, the rabbis had determined, once a year, that every Jew ceremoniously must eat one meal like the rich. And that one meal was to be the Passover, because it celebrated your freedom. Your freedom. Remember, they're under Roman tyranny. It was almost a protest movement because the Romans rule them, and they don't really have that much freedom. But the Passover indicated that God will free them. He took them out of Egypt through the Red Sea into the wilderness and wandered around, but he kept them fed, brought them into their own land. And the rabbis at Passover, because Passover represented them getting free from Egypt, the last plague of the last night when they were in captivity, if you were free, you were rich. That was your wealth, your freedom. You say, that sounds American. Why do you think we're called a Judeo-Christian culture? Because we relish freedom, almost worship it. And they wanted the people to know that if you were free, you were, say it, rich. Yeah, because some of you are going to say free indeed, because we're trained to do that, aren't we, right? But if you were free, you were rich. That was your wealth. Here's the deal. Tonight, every one of you in this room is seated at a rich man's table. This table is called a triclinium. Triclinium, that's the name of the table. It's not shaped this way because we thought it would be really cool and look pretty this way. This is a real shape of a real table. This table being low to the ground here is actually a more authentic height. A triclinium table was typically very low to the ground, sometimes on the ground, even, are you ready for this, sometimes below ground. It just depended on how they wanted to eat it. But the big deal was the U shape of the table. Everybody watch me here. The U shape of the table, everybody sat around the outside. All the wealthy revelers sat around the outside of the table, but nobody ever sat on the inside. When there was a triclinium table, it was in a room where the door was here. And what would happen? Servants would come through this door, and they would serve you from the inside of the table. If you had a triclinium table, you had servants because you were intended to be served from the inside of the table. You're rich because you have servants. You got slaves. That's a rich man's table. Have you got it? Now it's triclinium. Three-sided, clinium, reclining table. That's what it means. So here's the deal. You're all around the outside of these tables. Those of you sitting here in the chairs, nobody would have ever done it that way in Jesus' day. In Roman times, it wouldn't have happened. Consider yourselves blessed because you're comfortable. Right, guys? Yeah, they're looking upon you with envy. But in those days, being on the floor, or sometimes if you were really rich, on a couch, was very important. And not only was this a rich man's table, but there was a rich man's way of eating at the table. None of you here are capable of doing it because you're sitting in chairs. You guys here, some of you are doing it, and you know what you're doing. So let me demonstrate it for the rest of you guys, okay? This is how you ate at a triclinium table. You ate like this. It's called the reclining position, and it was a rich man's way of eating at a triclinium table. Now listen to me. The table, unless you were very, very wealthy, and there were only like 3 or 4 of you dining at the table isn't in front of you. The table is at your shoulder. You're perpendicular to the table. You're leaning on which arm? The left arm. I've immobilized it. I couldn't even accidentally touch food with my left arm. If I want to break bread, I've got to straighten myself up at the table. My right hand is how I eat. Where is the dirtiest part of my body? Where are my feet? As far from the food as I can put them, and in a position where I will not accidentally insult my neighbor who is in this same zigzag body position at the table. And we twist our bodies like this, and we eat off the table like that, and we talk back and forth across the table. You say, that's not very comfortable. No, it's not. But for them, it was, and it was considered elegant. You would have pads around the table, maybe cushions, maybe something like this. This is called a sumac, and they actually had these 200 years before the days of Jesus. Maybe they have these around the table. Maybe they have palm frond mats. They would have pillows or cushions all the way around the perimeter of the table. So you're on a mat or a pad, you've got a cushion under your arm, the table's here, the food's there. You're having an amazingly elegant meal. And you're going to eat when you're eating at a feast, whether it's a ceremonial feast or not, but especially if it's not ceremonial, you might be telling stories, quoting scripture, singing songs, playing games, getting up and just having fun with each other and greeting each other, going back and eating some more. Most feasts started late in the afternoon, usually what we would say around 4 or 4:30 in the afternoon. So it got dark quite quickly, and it gets dark, you're having fun, you're reveling around the table, and then the lamps begin to burn low, and you start to get tired. Well, what are you going to do? Go home? You can't go home. There's no street lamps out there. You live in another village. Between you and the village is about 5 miles space. In that space, there might be bears, lions, hyenas, leopards, jackals. You're not going out there. But wait, I'll just go out in the street. I live next door. No, you're not. There's no street lamps out there. You're going to get mugged. So what do? You got a cushion right here. You got a pillow right here. You got the food right there. The lamps are burning low. And you just go to sleep at the table. And then the rooster crows. You wake up. Oh, man. Oh, it's morning. Hey, I'm still at the feast. Look, they put out breakfast. Let's eat. And you sing more songs, play more games, tell more stories, quote more scripture, have fun and revel with each other. And if it were a wedding feast, it would go on like this for 7 straight days and nights. If it were a coming-of-age feast or some other special occasion, it could go on like this for 2 weeks. If you were a poor peasant, remember I invited you to my feast? It doesn't mean you're going to sit there for a few hours and go home. You're going to be with me for up to 2 weeks, and I'm going to serve you like a king. You would never miss a feast if you were ever invited to it. That's what's going on there. Now, let's talk about the disciples, because all of this begins to tie together, trust me. The disciples had an ongoing argument. What was it? What was it? Who was the greatest? Can you imagine Jesus surrounded by peasants, walking down the road, touching people, blessing people, listening to their problems? He's giving them wisdom from his Father, and oh, it's an amazing thing, and suddenly he feels a finger digging into his shoulder. And he turns around, and the guy says, "Excuse me, master, but are those guys with you?" And here they are. "He likes me best." "No, he doesn't like you. He likes me best." "No, I'm the greatest." "I am, and you better get used to..." Oy vey. Listen. What were they really arguing about? Was it a political argument? Was it just that he likes me better than the next guy? Actually, it's very clear. When you think about one of these tables, now I know some of you have been here before, but for the benefit of those of you who have not been to a biblical dinner before, when you came in here, I said, "Come in, stand around the table, make yourself comfortable," right? And you did. The disciples would never, ever, ever have done that. Because around every triclinium table, by rule of culture in those days, there was a pecking order. And you didn't just sit anywhere, because there were good seats, and there were other seats that weren't so good, and then there were the other seats. Let me show you what the disciples knew, and this is what they fought over. Dinner reservations. Look at this. This wing of the table here. This wing of the table here. This wing of the table right here. This wing of the table right here. You are the VIPs. Everybody wanted to sit here, and if you sat here, you were important. That's what the disciples argued about. We want to sit here. Now, here's the other part. You guys here in the middle, and you folks in the middle here, and over here, in our culture, those would be the great seats, because you want to sit right in the center, right? It's like Da Vinci, right? Wrong! You might be important, and you might not be important. But you folks right here, and right here, and right here, and right here, scum of the earth. Nobody ever wanted to sit here. I'm going to give you an example of that. Jesus, early in his, actually not so early in his ministry, but a little later on in his ministry, Over in Matthew chapter 23, Jesus tells his disciples something that he also told them earlier. He repeats it. I'm going to repeat it just once. But he tells them one time, listen, whenever you're invited to a wedding feast, I'll use this table right here, okay? So everybody watch me over here. Whenever you're invited to a wedding feast, Jesus said to his disciples, don't sit down at the best seats, lest he who invited you, the host, comes with someone more important and says to you, friend, what are you doing there? Give place to this man. And with shame, and they didn't have a lot of guilt back in those days, but they had a lot of shame. And with shame, you get up from the table and you take your place at the lowest seat. Instead, Jesus said, sit down at the lowest seats. Way to go, you scum of the earth people. So that he who invited you could come to you and say, friend, what are you doing there? Move up higher. And with great honor, in the presence of all, and no doubt walking slowly so everyone can see exactly where you're going, you take your place at a higher seat. Therefore, Jesus told his disciples, whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. That's where this comes from. It's about dinner reservations. And what the disciples fought about was who got to sit here. And here's why. They knew a passage of Scripture that you probably don't have memorized. Isaiah 25. Quick, who knows it? Yeah, see, there's 12 verses in Isaiah 25. They're not so important to you, but you should read them anyway. And I'll tell you, the disciples knew it. They knew that when the Messiah came to rule and reign on the earth, which they thought Jesus was going to do this time, Jesus spent almost his entire ministry telling them, no, it's when I come back. Not the first time, the second time I'm going to do this. But they believed it was going to be the first time. So they thought that when the Messiah comes to rule and reign, as Isaiah 25 said, he's going to initiate his kingdom with a great feast. And they also knew, because of this wing of the table right here, whoever sat at his right hand and his left hand when he came into his kingdom, they were the greatest. That was the source of their argument. Now, knowing that this table, being a triclinium, has this order around it, you have to ask one more question. How do we know? It's actually quite simple. In fact, over in Luke chapter 22, Jesus tells his disciples, Peter and John, in the morning, go into Jerusalem. There, you're going to find a man carrying a water jar. Sorry, ladies, men never did that. That was your work. Find the guy with the water jar and follow him to his house. When you get to his house, say to his master, where is the room where my disciples and I can have our Passover? He will take you to, Luke says, a large furnished upper room. There, make preparations for the Passover. The large furnished upper room goes by the name in the Greek, a kataluma. If somebody says kataluma and it's an upper room, it's only used for one purpose, dining. And there's only one type of table in a kataluma, a triclinium. Therefore, that's our first clue that this is what the actual Last Supper table looked at. You're at the Last Supper tonight. You are in it up to your neck. This is it. But there's more that will show you that this is what it was shaped like. As a matter of fact, we can say we're 99.9% sure. Why the 1%? Because nobody was there to take a picture of it. But this is the Last Supper. Now, knowing that the table is shaped like this, knowing this pecking order around the table, we can find 4 of the disciples at the Last Supper, right where they sat, and with each one, it becomes a marvelous, life-changing message, because you got to start thinking like Jesus' disciples to get this. First of all, let me show you where they sat. This person right here. Second from the end, left wing of the table. Right there. Second from the end, left wing of the table. Right here. Second from the end, left wing of the table. Right here. Second from the end, left wing of the table. Right here. You are the host. You are Jesus at the Last Supper. This is where he sat. You say, no, he sat in the middle. That's Da Vinci? Da Vinci's wrong? The traditional way of doing things in Jesus' day, at any triclinium table, the host was second from the end on the VIP wing of the table, right there. That's where Jesus would have reclined at the table at the Last Supper. The second person whose location we know at the Last Supper was right here, and right here, and right here, and right here. You are you ready? The bodyguard. The bodyguard? They didn't have bodyguards at the Last Supper. Yes, they did have a bodyguard at the Last Supper, because at any triclinium meal, there was always a bodyguard to protect the host. How long did triclinium feasts go on for? Days, right? If you have an enemy, the enemy knows where to find you in one place for days. So you have a bodyguard. Now, here's how this worked. I'm going to show you how this worked. Okay, so I'm the bodyguard. I'm at the end of the table. The table is here at my shoulder, but it ends here. I'm perpendicular to the table. The host is behind me in the same body position I'm in. The door is right there. I can see the door. I have the best view of it. There's nothing obstructing my view. If somebody comes through that door to harm the host, an enemy of the host, I'm in the best position of all to lay back with my body like a human shield and protect him. I'm the bodyguard. That's how it works. The bodyguard was also the most trusted friend of the host, because he had to trust that he would do his job and lay down his life for him. So the bodyguard has a very important role. But wait a second. If the bodyguard becomes a human shield to the host, you got to remember the guy coming through the door's got a spear or a sword. Makes him a human pincushion, which is why the bodyguard always had a sword. Now, yes, it's real. He always had a sword. Well, wait a minute. They didn't have swords at the Last Supper. Have you read Luke 22 recently? At the end of the chapter in Luke 22, one of the disciples shows up and says, "Look, Master, here are 2 swords." There were 2 swords at the Last Supper at least. And one of them, at the very least, was brought by this man right here, the bodyguard of Jesus at the Last Supper. Who was he? He tells us. That's the interesting part. You wonder if he had an ego problem or whether he was just trying to help us out tonight. He tells us who he was. You see, if I'm the bodyguard and Jesus is behind me and I want to talk with him, how am I going to do it? So Jesus. No, I'm not going to roll around on the floor. It's undignified. I'm going to bump the table. It's just not going to work. If I want to talk to Jesus, there's only one way to do it. I lean back. My head falls right back into the middle of his chest. I tilt my head up. He tilts his head down. We have a conversation. This was the disciple who leaned on Jesus' chest, John. And he uses that to refer to himself twice in his own gospel. The disciple who leaned on Jesus' breast. Now, I don't know about you, but the first time that I ever heard that, I thought, what kind of fellas are these? You? It's weird, isn't it? And when you see medieval paintings, not by Da Vinci, but other medieval artists, which I was an art major in college for a long time, I had to study this stuff, you'll find that there are paintings from the Renaissance and earlier where you have John sitting either in a chair in front of Jesus or on Jesus' lap doing this, because they didn't know what I just told you, and they didn't know about the reclining position. It was lost to history until recently, and they discovered that's how they did it. So that's why they painted John in these weird contorted positions in the paintings. But in real life, he was right where he could talk to Jesus. Well, you say, man, I'd never put my head on another guy's chest. Listen, personal space in the Middle East is very close. Those of you that have been to Israel with me, some of you are probably going to go this year too, you'll know that if you talk to a native from that area, be they a Jew or an Arab, they're talking to you right here. And I back up, and they're here. And I back up, and they move up even closer. And I mean, personal space is very close. I'm comfortable when you're here. They're here. But that's life in the Middle East. That's always been that way. It's close enough so that, I don't know if you've ever been to, say, London Heathrow Airport during the Hajj, when everybody's heading to Mecca and you have Muslims everywhere. You will see Muslim men and Arabs walking around hand in hand. They are not gay. They are friends. And that's the way it works. So, personal space. This is John, the bodyguard. The third person whose location we know is right over 1, 2, 3, right here. And 1, 2, 3, right here. 1, 2, 3, right here. And 1, 2, 3, right here. You are the guest of honor. You are sitting there because Jesus said, you will sit here, you're my guest of honor. Congratulations. But don't take it personally, you are also Judas Iscariot. Now, we got to think about this for a second. Judas Iscariot, guest of honor. Judas Iscariot, guest of honor. This is all wrong. How do we know this? Why was it this way? Well, first of all, you got to know how we know this was Judas. Jesus makes this startling announcement at the Last Supper when he says, one of you here at this table tonight is going to betray me. The disciples don't sit there and go, I wonder who it is. They erupt into outrage. They're starting to shout. Some are saying, who is it? Who is it? Tell us who it is. Can you imagine the roar that must have come up in that room? Other guys are going, is it me? They must be insecure or something. Is it me? Tell me, Lord, is it me? Lord, is it I? No, it's who is it? Well, Peter, who is over here somewhere, catches John's eye because John is here. He doesn't have a good view of the table, and he can catch Peter's eye. Peter is over here. Peter catches John's eye. Can't stand the suspense. He goes, ask him who it is. John leans back on Jesus' chest, and he says, Master, who is it? Jesus says loudly enough for everyone to hear, because everyone did. He said, it's the one who dips in the sop with me. And then what Jesus would have had to have done is straightened himself out at the table into a seated position. He picks up a piece of bread. He tears off a small bite-sized piece and dips it into a broth in front of him, reaches around to his left, and puts it into the mouth of Judas Iscariot, marking him as the betrayer. And right then, right there, the disciples knew that Judas couldn't possibly be the betrayer. You don't put bread in your betrayer's mouth. He's a betrayer. You punch him in the face. You grab him and you throw him down the stairs and you hope he doesn't survive. You get rid of the guy, but you don't put bread in your betrayer's mouth. He is your enemy. This is for your most beloved friends. And yet Jesus did it. And when he put bread into Judas's mouth, let me pick on you because you're just right there, okay? When he put bread into Judas's mouth, Judas, the Bible tells us, became possessed by Satan. Not a demon, and not just any demon, by the devil himself. We don't know for how long, but when the bread went into his mouth, Satan possessed him. He gets up from the table, grabs the money bag. That's another thing. They didn't suspect Judas because Judas kept the money bag. You don't give the bank to some shifty-eyed, drooling thief. You give it to the most trusted disciple that is there, and Judas had to have been the most trusted disciple by all the rest of the disciples because he carried the money bag. He grabs the money bag, he gets up from the table, and he leaves. The disciples ask, where's he going? Some of the disciples thought, the Bible tells us, he was going out to buy more food, do a good deed, or give money to the poor. But not one of them suspected Judas to be the betrayer. Because you don't put bread into the guest of honor's mouth, your betrayer. That doesn't happen. So there's another mystery Jesus told us. We don't get that one either. And life goes on at the table while Judas leaves. Should they have known? I think so. I think so. And here's why. Back at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, over in Luke chapter 6, there's another version of the Sermon on the Mount. It's actually a different sermon because it's in a different location. So we know it's similar, but it's not the same sermon. In that sermon, Jesus begins one section of it like this. He said, you who hear me. That means, are you listening? Are you listening? Are you listening? You who hear me, I say to you, love your enemy. Now, here's the question. How do you do that? Probably everyone in this room either has or has had enemies, and you know what that feels like. And as a Christian, you've had to deal with that, and you might pray, wow, I got to learn to forgive my enemy. How do I forgive my enemy? Well, I'm going to pray, Lord, just help me to forgive my enemy. And what we're really asking for is God to give us an overwhelming spiritual fondness for that person so that I can think about them and I can feel good about them and I can feel like I could be nice to them. And, oh, they're going to be so precious to me even though they're my enemy. If that's what you're praying, you're going to be waiting a really long time because that's not what he's talking about. You see, that's phileo love. That's fondness, friendship love. But when he said love your enemy, he used a different word. It was agape, God's love. And we say, well, agape, that's love in spite of, that's unconditional love. Really, what does that mean? Yeah, what does that look like? I don't really know. Actually, you do. Agape love is not connected to any particular emotional feeling. It's only connected to what you do for another person that's good as if it's from God himself. It's an action. It's an act. It's an outworking of the love, and it's always good. You do good. Well, wait a minute. You see, Jesus fleshed it out for us. Not in the flesh, but showed us how it worked. It's the perfect three-point sermon that I'll bet you wish I would do, and maybe Pastor Ken sometimes, though I'm sure he speaks a lot shorter than I do, where Jesus simply said this, I say to you, love your enemies. How? Do good to those who hate you. He did not say feel good about them. He never said feel good about them. He said do good to those who hate you. Second, bless those who curse you. They're dragging your name through the mud. They're cursing you to God. You bless them. Maybe if they were blessed, they'd stop cursing you. And pray for those who are harming you. They've chained you to a wall. They've painted you into a corner. You cannot escape. They're doing wickedness to you, and you can't get away from them. Then pray for them, because 2 times in the Old Testament, God reveals something very important. I know where your enemy lives. Pray for them. That's how we love one another. And so Jesus, naming his enemy, Judas, who has it in for him. This is not an accident, and it is premeditated on Judas's part, and he hasn't fooled Jesus, because Jesus is hearing from his Father everything. And he says, this is who my betrayer is. And he tears off a piece of bread, and he dips it. And he puts it into Judas's mouth, as if to say, and he did, Judas, you are my brother, and I would gladly die for you. In fact, tomorrow I will. Judas, I love you. Judas, I do you honor, great honor. Judas, I am your friend. Judas, I forgive you. And now you know. And Judas got up, and as John said, he went out, and it was night. How do you love your enemies? Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who are harming you. How do you love your enemies? Well, I don't. Jesus showed us how to do it. And he did it with this. Honor my enemy. Wouldn't that be rewarding them for doing wickedness to me? Not at all. It's obedience to God, saying, God loves you, and I will follow suit. Here it is. The last person whose location we know at the table is way over here. And right here, and right here, and right here. Guess who? Peter. Now, good old Peter. If you know anything about this table, which you do, this is not only the scum of the earth wing of the table, that's the scum of the earth seat at the scum of the earth wing of the table. Nobody wanted to sit here. The person who is sitting here is lowest, least, last, Peter is there, and you know that Peter liked to be first, and he'd be the first one to tell you that he should be first. But he's not only last, he's dead last. What's he doing there? Well, there are some theories about what he's doing there. Very quickly, maybe he sat there by default. Remember, he and John set the table. They were doing it all day. The disciples come piling in. Maybe Peter was outside getting more food or something. He walks into the room. He looks around. Oh, come on, guys. What's the only empty seat? That one. I can't sit there. I'm Peter. I can't sit there. Come on, Peter, sit down. No, wait. I'm Peter. I'm the rock. I walked on water. Yes, and you sank too. Sit down. And so Peter goes over to this horrible seat, and he reclines at this horrible seat, but he's standing up on the inside. Now, maybe Peter sat here because everybody comes in. He knows that's the only seat that's going to be empty because that's the way these tables work. Nobody wanted to sit there, and he waits because he wants everybody to see how humble he is. And this is a very popular theory, that Peter came in and waited, and then he goes over here, and he gladly takes this horrible seat and reclines on one arm because he is so humble. And he knows that the master is going to see him very clearly. Oh, Peter, look at you. You're so humble. Peter, Judas, take a lap. Peter, come on up here, because those who are way down here, they're going to get exalted, aren't they? Those who, we talked about the table here, that whoever exalts himself will be humbled. Whoever humbles himself will be exalted. That's what Jesus said. Peter's listening, right? He's going to exalt me. He doesn't. And Peter sits there, and he's humble, and he waits. And he waits. And he waits. And he waits. And why isn't he moving me? Can't he see how humble I am? I think the real thing that happened here, and this is only a theory, if you don't like it, I don't hold you to it, but I think this is what happened. I think Jesus told Peter to sit here. Peter comes in, and Jesus says, Peter, well, John, you're here. Judas, be my guest of honor. Peter, you're here. What? No, Peter, sit there. No, but Master. Peter, sit there. But sit. Down he goes, and he reclines at the table, but he doesn't understand why, and he resents it. Why does the Master hate me? And he's standing up on the inside again. Now, I have told you that Peter didn't want to sit there. I have told you that he resents it. And how do we know that he was sitting there, and how do we know he didn't want to be there? The answer is very simple. It comes in John 13. In John 13, Jesus gets up from the table and shows us what's really going on when he shows all of us the full extent of his love. You want to see all of it? Here it is. Take a really good look. Jesus gets up from the table, and he goes over to this end of the table. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us that, but we know he had to have done it. Because you see, at every triclinium table, if you didn't have servants or slaves present, these objects here are used for what? They're used for what? They were set here for the convenience of that gentleman right there, who by default became the foot washer of everyone else. And late into the evening, everyone's feet are still dirty. I'm no foot washer. I know that stuff's there, but I'm not supposed to be sitting here. You want your feet washed, you find somebody else to do it, but it isn't going to be me. Jesus, late into the evening, gets up from the table. Judas is still here, by the way. He hasn't left yet. So Jesus gets up from the table. He walks over here. He strips himself down bare-chested, down to his loincloth. He takes a large linen towel. He wraps the towel around his waist. Now this becomes his clothing. He's going to be wiping people's feet on his clothing. How's that for humility? Then he takes the pitcher and the basin, and he goes over to the most honorable wing of the table. Everybody's feet are way out behind them, right where he can get to them. Remember, they don't have to crawl under the table. They're out behind them. They're reclining, right? He washes John's feet first. And then he washes Judas's feet. Judas is still there. He hasn't left yet. Going back in time a few minutes. And then he goes all the way around the table until the Bible said he finally came to... And Peter has a very strange reaction to all of this. He says, are you going to wash my feet too? Should have been him. And Jesus said, Peter, now listen to these words. I'm going to come back to them. They don't mean anything to you right now, and they won't. They will. Trust me. And you won't know how, but watch this. He said, Peter, you don't realize what I'm doing right now, but later you'll understand. And then Peter said those immortal words, no, Lord, you'll never wash my feet. I mean, he was humble, right? No, I don't think that's the way it came out of his mouth. You see, 6 months before this night, way up in the northern finger of Israel, Jesus gathered his disciples together at a place called Caesarea Philippi. If you come to Israel with me next year or this year, I'll show you this place. He says to his disciples, who do you say that I am? Peter, filled with the Holy Spirit even before Pentecost, says, you're the Messiah. You're the Son of the living God. And Jesus goes nuts. He's just excited. He says, Peter, blessed are you, Peter, son of Jonah, because flesh and blood didn't tell you that. My Father told you that. Way to go, Peter. And Peter, in this lousy position that he's in, remember, if he's reclining on his left arm, unlike John, he's got the best view of the whole table, and he can watch Jesus individually wash everybody's feet, and it should have been him doing this, but he was too proud to do it. And here is not just the rabbi, not just the teacher, this is the Messiah. This is the Savior of the world. This is the Son of the living God, God wrapped in human skin. This is who Peter knows he is because it came right out of his mouth. And now that person who is a foot washer wants to wash his feet? No, Lord, you'll never wash my feet. Because he knew it was wrong. It should have been him. He is ashamed. But then Jesus says these words. But Peter, if I don't wash your feet, you can't have any part with me. Then what did he say? Give me a bath. He loved Jesus. Man, wash my hand, my head's all of me. My head all, and it's like almost like Jesus had to calm him down. Peter, no, it's okay. It's like, just your feet, you know. And Jesus said, no, your feet are dirty. I just need to wash your feet. And then Peter let him. And as Peter's feet are stretched out behind him, and Jesus, Lord God, creator of the universe, Messiah, Savior of Israel, the anointed one, the one who was expected and who will return, bare-chested, kneels down as the foot washer, and he washes Peter's feet. That, right there, is the full extent of his love. How so? Jesus, Messiah, Lord God, creator of the universe, showed us that he became the foot washer of a foot washer. Nobody ever washed a foot washer's feet. And the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, the greatest in the universe, washed a foot washer's feet. No wonder they call it the full extent of his love. And he did it the next day for us, because that was the foreshadowing, that was the parable of the reality that came the next morning by 9 o'clock. Jesus is nailed to a cross. Now, this is an execution. This isn't some poor, sad martyr's death. He is nailed to a cross, a Roman cross, which is the most humiliating and vile form of execution in the world, and that was given to the worst criminals of all. And here you have the Lord, the Lord of the universe, someone who is absolutely holy, who has never done anything wrong. And he's nailed to the cross for the sins of the whole world, of everyone who ever sinned, is living now, and ever will live in sin, that he died for our sins. From the cross, he washed your feet and mine. He washed the feet of the world, so that if anyone would, they can come. No one is left out that wants to come. That means the most vile people in the world are eligible for heaven if they come through Jesus Christ, repenting of their sins. Jesus washed the foot washer's feet. There's the full extent of his love. And he washed your feet from the cross, which is why you are here tonight. Well, Jesus puts his clothes back on, and he resumes his seat at the table, and he says, do you know what it is that I've done for you, as he tells his disciples? You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so. That's what I am. Now that I, your teacher and Lord, have washed your feet, now you wash each other's feet. Whoa. And then he said these 7 words. You would think that he said them all over the place. He only said them here in the Bible. I have set an example for you that you should do as I have done for you. What's that? Wash each other's feet, church. And then he said this, a servant, well, that's you, is not greater than his master. That's me. And the messenger, well, that's you, isn't greater than the one who sent him. That's me. And now that you know these things, you will be, just terribly inconvenienced if you do them. No. Now that you know these things, you will be, I'll be so humiliated if I do them. No, now that you know these things, you will be blessed. Blessed? Being a foot washer? Yeah, if you do them. Which brings up a question. How do I do that? Jesus commands me to do that. Well, Pastor Ken, you can have a foot washing service here. Maybe you've had them before. But I've been a part of a foot washing service before many times, and I've learned something from it, probably the same thing that Pastor Ken has. If you do a foot washing service, you can never announce it, right? Because everybody shows up with the cleanest feet you've ever seen, and it defeats the whole purpose. You don't want anybody to know you have dirty, stinky feet, so you wash them before somebody else does. It doesn't really work that way. Well, how do you wash somebody's feet? Well, you can get your own pitcher, basin, and towel, go out in the street and tackle somebody, tear their shoes off, and start washing their feet that way. At least you know you got a dirty pair of feet. Or perhaps washing somebody else's feet is just an awful lot more than that. Because it always involves lifting up a low person, because the foot washer was the lowest, and they lifted everybody up above them. That's what they did. Make sense? So maybe if you go to this church, we'll just use this church as an example, Calvary Chapel, Roseville. You come in here tomorrow morning, and just maybe somebody sits in that back row. Present company accepted, okay? But somebody sits in that back row, and they just walked in off the street. They don't smell good. They don't have, they're not articulate. They don't speak in any sort of a manner that maybe you can't even understand them very well. Maybe they smell like alcohol and cigarettes and everything else. They're tattered. And you go up to that person and you sit down next to them. And you say to them, how can I pray for you? I'd like to pray for you right now. How can I pray for you? And you do. And you lift them up into the heavenlies by your prayer. Or perhaps the same person, you go over next to them and you say, hey, after church, can I buy you lunch? Can I make you a sandwich? I want to hear your story. Would you be willing to tell me your story? Perhaps that's a way to wash somebody else's feet. Those, or maybe a billion other things God may have you do, but it always takes somebody who is very low, and you lift them higher than yourself. Especially foot washers, lifting them up, like the guys in the back row, perhaps. I want to go back to Peter, and then I'm going to conclude with something. I've gone too long, so I'm going to keep it brief here, but if you'll just bear with me. Peter got up and left, so you're going to be Peter now, okay? Now, here's the deal. Is that okay with you? You're Mrs. Peter. Okay, Mrs. Peter. I told you, we're going to get back to this, but I said I think Jesus told Peter to sit there. Peter wanted to sit up here. He resented being here because he didn't wash anybody's feet. He shouldn't have been sitting in that seat, in his opinion. He didn't want to be there. But I think Jesus told him to sit there because Peter wanted to sit in the best seat in the house. If you remember, I told you that there were ranks of slaves, and that at the highest rank there was, of course, the steward of the house. All the way at the bottom, the lowest, least, last, worst slave was the foot washer. Jesus one day told his disciples over in Mark chapter 9, if they were arguing again about who's going to be the greatest, and he said, if you want to be the greatest in my Father's kingdom is the slave, literally, of everyone. And when the disciples heard that crawl in their heads, they're not abstracting going, that'll make a good sermon someday. I wonder what that means. We could talk about that for weeks on end. No, it meant to them there was only one slave of everyone in every slave-filled household. Who was it? The foot washer. Because they were the lowest slave. All Jesus was referring to was the lowest ranking slave. They were the slave of everyone. You want to be great in my kingdom? The greatest in my Father's kingdom is the slave of everyone. Peter wants to sit up here. Jesus says, Peter, you sit there. Because that is the best seat in the house. Right there. He wanted to sit in the best seat. It's obvious because he didn't want to sit there. He got it all wrong. Peter, you don't realize what I'm doing right now, but later you'll understand. Doesn't that have weight now? As it should. That's the best seat in the house. In your church, if your church were a triclinium table, in your neighborhood, among your friends, maybe among clubs, a social club or something, among those people, if it were a triclinium, where do you sit? Here or here? Maybe the more telling question is this. Where do you want to sit? Here or here? Because that's the best seat in the house, right there. The last thing, forgive me for going a little long, but watch this. The last thing I want to talk to you tonight is let's go back to bread. Now, Charlie and I are friends from way back. We grew up in the same village. We've been buddies all our lives. Man, next door neighbors and best friends. But we got into a real bad fight. We're really mad at each other. Horrible quarrel. However, we do know that it shouldn't be that way. And we need to make friends again. How would we do that? Well, in our day and age, I go, Charlie, I'm sorry. Let's shake on it. And we shake on it. But that's not a very reliable way to reconcile, is it? I mean, just like I'm shaking his right hand, but I am checking his left for maybe a knife that might go in my back someday. But let bygones be bygones. No, in Jesus' day and in the Middle East today, especially among people like the Bedouins, this is how they do it. This is how they reconcile. They break bread. Now, this is how it works. Pay attention. In my hand, how many pieces of bread do you see in my hand? Say it. Very good. I pray. I break the bread. How many pieces of bread do you see in my hands? One. One. You say, no, there's something wrong with your brain, Jay. No, one piece of bread. Think of it like this. You have a prized vase at home. It's sitting on the counter. You knock it off the counter. It shatters all over the floor. How many vases are on the floor? One. It's one piece of bread. Got the concept? Now, here's the deal. This is one piece of bread. This is the way that they, in their minds, picture this. Charlie and I have been angry at each other, but we've agreed, let's break bread, because this is the way to reconcile. Good bread, isn't it? So I take the bread, I pray, the same prayer you prayed. I break the bread. I hand Charlie one half of the one piece of bread. I have the other half of the same piece of bread. Are you getting this? He eats the bread, the same piece I've got on my hand. It goes into his body, and it becomes part of him. I take the same piece of bread, the other half of it. I eat it. It goes into my body. It becomes part of me. The same piece of bread that went into him went into me. The same piece of bread that went into me went into him. It becomes part of us. What does that make us? Brothers under the skin. Think very literally. Think very, very concretely about this. Not just one. One is an abstract. Brothers. Because the same thing that's in you is in me. Same thing that's in me is in you. We are now physically related to each other. Therefore, we are now reconciled. We are one. And whatever the quarrel was is now forgotten forever. Have you got that far? On the night that Jesus was betrayed, every last one of his disciples deserted him. The night of his resurrection, Jesus appears in a room. It's locked. It's full of disciples. They're terrified. None of the men saw Jesus that day with the possible exception of Peter, and he's not telling. They're locked in the room the night of the resurrection. Jesus mysteriously but wonderfully appears in his resurrection body right there in the middle of the room. Here he is in the resurrected flesh. And he says to them, Shalom Alechem. And they said nothing. They were terrified. As a matter of fact, they probably said, ah! But Jesus had to repeat himself because they said nothing. They just said nothing. The next words out of Jesus' mouth, to these men who deserted him, have you got anything to eat? And he ate with them. Yes, it was to prove he wasn't a ghost, but he still ate with them. 1 week later, they're still in that house. Those deserters. Thomas is now there. He wasn't there the first time. Jesus appears in the middle of the room. Shalom Alechem, he said. And then he asked them, have you got anything to eat? And he ate with them. Every one of the guys in that room deserted Jesus to a man. You say, John didn't do that. John followed at a distance with Peter. They didn't want to get that close. They were scared. They deserted him. What did Jesus do with those deserters? He ate with them. Some doubted. Well, Thomas doubted. Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 15, he's talking to the apostles, some doubted. What did Jesus do with those doubters? He ate with them. One of them denied him 3 times. And finally, following the Lord's instructions, the guys pack up and leave that room and go up to the northern edge of the Sea of Galilee up by Capernaum, where Jesus said, as resurrected Jesus, he hasn't ascended to heaven yet, he said, I will meet you up there. And when they arrive, he's nowhere to be found. And Peter had enough. He tells the other disciples, I'm going fishing. Now, that doesn't mean, look, I'm going to go down to the lake and I'm going to drown a few worms. You know how therapeutic that is. I'll feel much better in the morning. It means I quit. I'm going back to my old job. I'm through being a disciple. I don't even know what an apostle is anymore. I'm going fishing, and anybody who wants to come with me, come with me. 6 of the disciples go with them, including John. They quit too. They go out in the boat at dusk. They throw their nets out all night. Now remember, there are boats all over the place fishing. They're the only one not catching anything. They didn't even get a guppy all night long. Peter, you find in the morning, is stripped down to his loincloth in the boat. That tells you he's working really hard. What's the coldest part of the day? And it's around Passover, so it's right around March or April. It's freezing out there. He's working so hard, he's got a sweat in a cold weather. He's stripped down. And suddenly John notices there's a man over by the shore. Don't recognize him, and he's only about 100 yards away. And the guy shouts at him. He says, have you caught anything? Like he's looking to buy some fish. Peter answers back, no. The man suddenly says, throw your nets out the right side of the boat. They do. And as they begin to haul it in, it's the single largest catch of fish these professional fishermen have ever netted. 153 large fish, mostly tilapia. They're trying to get it in the boat. They can't get the net in the boat. There's too many fish. The fish are swimming against the net. They're big. They can't get the net in the boat. More disciples come alongside. Grab the net. They can't get it in. Look at all the fish. And suddenly John figures it out. He looks at the man on the shore. He looks at the fish. He looks up at Peter and he goes, Peter, this reminds me of Luke chapter 5. Peter, that's the Lord. Peter knew it. And he dives into the water. He swims a short, shallow 100 yards to shore, and he pulls himself out, and there's Jesus. And you know what he's doing? Making breakfast. Now, I have heard from one pastor, you know how Jesus makes breakfast? Breakfast. Okay, not today, though. And he's got a little stack of bread going like this. All you need to make one of these is a little oil, water, flour, salt, a charcoal fire, and a hot rock. It takes nothing. And he's got a stack of these going because he's got a lot of disciples out there. Peter comes and sits down. The boat comes up on the shore. They're still dragging the net behind them. They never did get it into the boat. They sort the fish out. Jesus says, Peter, go bring some of the fish back, and he comes back with the disciples. They sit down around the fire. And there Jesus, with the stack of bread, talks to his deserters, talks to his doubters, talks to his denier. and reconciled them back to himself over a meal of fish and bread. And they never left him again. He ascended into heaven a week later, and they followed him to their deaths, every one of them, because of this. Almost all of Jesus' appearance after his resurrection involved eating bread. And he's still asking us, come and eat. Christians, even if you're not a Christian, come and eat, Jesus says, with me. Even if you failed. Come and eat, especially if you've failed. One of the biggest failures in the whole Bible was the church at Laodicea, there in Revelation chapter 3, where he says, you make me so sick I want to vomit you out of my mouth. But, he said, Laodicea, behold, I stand at the door and I knock. And if anyone hears my voice, I will come into him and I will eat with him. And that meant bread, because that's how the meal started. And he with me. And he's still knocking, he's still asking, he's still pleading, come and eat. And you may be thinking, even if you're a Christian here tonight, which most of you in this room probably are, you may be thinking, but I'm kind of worried that Jesus will never take me back because I've done or thought things that are really, really terrible. I've even made an enemy out of him. And you've heard the old Middle Eastern expression, haven't you never eat with your enemy? Why would he want to eat with me? But the evening pivots right here, where Jesus said, the Apostle Paul said to the Romans, for if, when we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through the death of his Son, how much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved through his life? What life? The bread of life. I am the bread of life, Jesus said. I want you to pretend that my hand is the hand of God the Father in heaven. God takes Jesus, the manna from heaven, the hidden manna, the bread of life, that whoever eats this bread will live forever. And God hands Jesus, the bread of life, down to sinful man and says, will you take my Son, the bread of life? Will you take him into yourself? And if you do, we'll be reconciled. On the night he was betrayed, Jesus took bread and he broke it. And he said, this bread means my body. Eat it and never forget what you see here tonight. And God takes the broken bread of Jesus, the bread of life, and hands him down to sinful man. And he says, will you take my Son? Will you take him into your life? And he will become part of you, and he is part of me. And you and I, we will be reconciled. We will be one. We will be family. And the quarrel that I have against you for your sin, I will personally forget for all eternity. I hope you never look at communion the same way again. There's a lot going on there. I get to share this with my congregation every communion Sunday. It's wonderful. But this is the truth, and this is what's going on. And don't forget that Jesus, the bread of life that reconciles us to God, and that bread on Communion Sunday that we take reminds us of that. Don't forget that everybody else is partaking of the same piece of bread that you are. And what does that do? I forgive you. That's what it does. Which is why I think, and Ken, I'm just going to add this, that over in the book of Acts chapter 2, the perfect description of the church, newly born, and they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine, in the fellowship, in the breaking of bread, and of prayer, which is how the church got along with itself, because they were constantly in a state of reconciliation. They kept eating bread with each other. They couldn't hate each other if they wanted to. And neither do we. if we're willing. And we need to be willing. That's what Jesus showed us. Two things. First of all, if you think you've done something so wrong that God will never take you back all night tonight, you've heard, oh, yes, He will. And He's made the way. And the last thing is, if you're at odds with somebody, maybe even in this room, or not in this room, but in this church, or maybe at your church if you don't come here, but wherever you go. A suggestion only. Take that person aside, make them lunch, dinner, buy them a meal, and get a piece of bread. Doesn't matter what it is, a loaf of bread or a dinner roll. And ask if they'd eat with you. And break bread with them. You say, but they weren't here. They wouldn't know. Doesn't matter. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. And besides, in the words of an ancient rabbi, it takes two to reconcile, but it only takes one to forgive. Let's all stand, and I'm going to bring Pastor Ken up here to pray with us, and then I'm going to wrap it up. We'll finish. Thank you for bearing with me going over time, by the way. Pastor Ken.
Lord, I love this brother. Been to Israel with him more than once. And Father God, I'm thankful that we travel the same road. Different cities, different countries, but it's the same path. It's the same journey. And we'll walk into eternity with each other. We all will. The rapture comes, we'll all fly into eternity, caught up. Otherwise, each one of us, one day, will have that destination place. And we'll all meet together. And Lord, we ask a blessing upon him as he goes from church to church, with the biblical dinner, biblical wedding, and as he blesses so many people all over the world. And Father, prosper him, bless him, protect him in his travels. And Lord, just preserve him as well, as we love him, and you love him. We pray this in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. All right. God bless you, Ken. Thank you. Well, if I could finish with a blessing. We started with one. Let me give you one as we leave. It's a blessing that's very familiar to you, but maybe not in this particular language, where it says this. Yiva rechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Ya'er Adonai panav alecha v'yechu necha. Ya'aseh Adonai panav alecha v'yasim lecha shalom. Which means, may the Lord bless you and keep you and make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May he lift up his countenance upon you and give you shalom. Shalom Alechem, everyone. Close enough. God bless you and thank you for coming tonight in Jesus' name.